It is. It's a full 10 minutes to get over here, isn't it? That's right. But this is great. We had classes over here last year also, and it's kind of nice being out in the open like this. Now, can everybody hear me? Okay, and everybody back over in there? Everybody can hear okay. Good. Well, let's go ahead and start. I think most everyone is here. If you recall last session, Brother Ben talked about civilizations and groups that would consume each other. They're in one place, and he said that we are now finding that we will have ethnic groups coming upon us. The Holy Bible is directed to a specific group of people, we know, but also the Word of God is a precept that's available for anyone that wants to hear it and wants to believe it. What is said in here will work for other peoples as well as it will work for us. Otherwise, there's no value, no purpose in us going to the four corners of the world and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, because it's got to apply to them also. One of the things that we talk a lot about, and I use the expression, the Hegelian dialect, a lot, and when I speak to people, one of the things that we, I believe, need to know is how this thing works. And when I use the word Hegelian dialect, I'm in some sense misusing it. Because generally what we're talking about is, when I give messages, I talk about communism, Marxist Leninism as it were, because they don't want us to use the word communist anymore. They call it too simplistic. If you find a guy that is a socialist, one world socialist, and he's carrying the red banner behind him, and he believes in Marx and Lenin, and he preaches it, and for you to say, well, you know, that man's a communist, they jump all over you, and they say, well, you mean to tell me that he's a card-carrying member of the Communist Party? No, that's not what we're saying. So it's too simplistic for us to say communist anymore, so we'll use the word Marxist-Leninist. Now, when I do talk, I give examples of the dialectics, and we'll discuss that in just a little bit. And generally, what I talk about is a controlled conflict of the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. The thesis being the original point of view, the original precept, the antithesis being the counter precept of a diversionary type point of view, and the synthesis after a conflict takes place. The synthesis is what drops out, and it generally is not really, it's not like either one of the two parents. All right, now, I use the word controlled conflict, and I call this the Hegelian dialect. This is where I have really been too simplistic. It's not exactly the Hegelian dialect that we're talking about. Dialectical materialism is the term that the communists use. And what they have done is that they have borrowed some of Hegel's philosophy to come up with what they call the dialectical materialism. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. So when we talk about the Hegelian dialect, we're not generally talking about dialectical materialism, nor are we talking about what Marx and Lenin used, and now use in that system to develop their goal. So we have to define this, and that's the purpose of the message today. So it's way too simplistic to call everything the Hegelian dialect. Now, the controlled conflict, and that is dialectical materialism, has been used against us by the communists. As a result of this, and Hegel somewhat getting the credit for it, there are philosophers who have said many things about Hegel. The modern philosopher Ernst Cassirer says this: "No other philosophical system has exerted such a strong and enduring influence upon political life as that of Hegel." Now, he's misusing it a little bit too when he says that. We're going to talk about it. Professor Mueller also regards Hegel's philosophy as, quote, "the most important for us in this 20th century." Now, we're already recognizing that the dialectical materialism is being used the world over, and it's destroying us. And so what this man Mueller says is true. Another philosopher, a man by the name of Hartman, says that all recent political ideologies bear his stamp. Now, they're talking about Hegel, but they should be talking about modified Hegel. We're going to talk about that. So today, I think that the best thing for us to do is to first discuss Hegel's philosophy. What did he have as a philosophy? What did he teach? And then we should compare that philosophy with that of Marx. They're going to be very, very similar. There's going to be some very powerful differences. So we'll compare Hegel's philosophy, once we have discussed that a bit, with Marx, and then what we'll do is give some examples in history of the precepts of how it works. And then I would like, perhaps we have a few moments to open up questions, or maybe you would then have examples of modern day Hegelian dialect or dialectical materialism, some examples of how it has worked in our lives today. Now, as you can probably already see, in some respects, Hegel has received some bum raps. Now, I'm not defending him, I'm not supporting him, I'm not arguing with him. But I see, because of misunderstandings of Hegel and misunderstanding of dialectical materialism, we've lumped it all into one big pile, and we should be separating the apples and the oranges. One of the reasons why he has received somewhat of a bum rap is that Marx utilized the Hegelian philosophy in a political sense. Now, when we think of the Hegelian dialect, we think of communism. Marx did not teach Hegel's philosophy, and Hegel did not teach Marx's philosophy. All right, so this is a difference. His second point that draws consternation from the Christian community, and I think that we in the identity movement must understand this very clearly. Hegel said that everything, including war, was for the good. Now, that's hard for many Christians to understand. We're going to talk about that a little bit in just a while, and I think that you're going to see what Hegel's political, his philosophy, his point of view is, and I think you'll find where it comes from in his mind. All right, so another thing that I think we need to understand is that Hegel was considered a Christian philosopher. Now, that comes as a shock, I know, to people who think, well, now we're talking about Hegelian dialect, we're talking about communism, but Hegel was a Christian. In fact, Hegel studied at the school of Tübingen. He was a student of theology. He was considered a Christian theologian. Strangely enough, he wasn't what you would call a particularly good student. Now, that's nothing bad about him either, because if you will go back in history, and all of our modern scientists, not all, but many of our modern scientists, our engineers, our philosophers of today and so forth, were very, very poor at school. The reason was very simple. They saw what the teacher was putting out and what the teacher was teaching, but they saw it from a different point of view. They saw something strange in there that didn't quite ring true, and they questioned the teacher, and that gave them a bad mark. So being a student isn't necessarily a prerequisite to being a good philosopher or even a good theologian. All right, so Hegel wasn't necessarily a good student. Additionally, he was a terrible lecturer. And so what they had to do, in fact, his son and another man put together his works to put them into a systematic system so that it could be understood by you and me, because he kind of went from helter-skelter in his thinking, and also his thoughts, as any philosopher would, his thoughts would change as time goes on. As he learned something new, what he had said 10 years previously had to be modified a little bit. So you have to take that into account. All right, now, as a result of his works, though, during Hegel's later life in Germany, he was considered their foremost philosopher. But then, at his death, shortly after, and this is the case too in many of the greater men's works. Maybe I shouldn't use the word great there, because Hegel was a man unto himself, and the verdict is still yet out as to whether what he said was right or wrong. But in any event, the men who are famous, oftentimes their philosophy dies when they die. But with the case of Hegel, in recent years, because Marx and Lenin used the basis of his philosophy for their good, for their job to do, the Hegelian dialect has been resurrected, so to speak, in the schools, and it's a very popular subject in the colleges of today. All right, so what is it that made Hegel? What did he think? His first thought, his first thesis, was that everything was monistic. Now, monism means that there is one reality, and everything is interpreted in terms of that one reality. All right, now, dualism is the opposite. You have as examples of the dualism the yin and yang, Zoroastrianism, and the concepts of the Eastern Orient, that there's a God within us and all we have to do is develop it, and that there are shades of gray to everything, nothing is black and white. All right, now that's yin and yang, dualism, Zoroastrianism, and that is dualism. Now, monism, being the opposite, says also that there's one God, that's monotheistic. Pantheism is the same as dualism. There is more than one God or many gods. So now we don't have any argument with Hegel and what he is saying there. I don't think that we can condemn Hegel for being monistic. All right, now, one place where we might point a finger at him is that for some reason Hegel did not invoke the name of God very often. And he used another term. And I think you got to just kind of grasp onto this a little bit, because it'll, if you think of it as in the way he was trying to say it, I think you might try to see what he's trying to say. He puts the name of God in his works as the universal spirit. Now, we hear of that term oftentimes, and of course we hear of a lot of terms for God too, you know, Yahweh and God and Elohim and El Shaddai and so forth. So we have differences of opinion even among ourselves as to what we're going to call God. All right, but he called God the universal spirit. So let's forgive him if we don't quite understand this and don't agree with it. For the moment, let's forgive him. Now, from that, he discusses oftentimes the individual spirit that is within each of us. He talks about the individual spirit, and then he puts them together into what he terms a national spirit. Now, we in the identity are going to see some things here that Hegel was trying to say. So bear with me now. He then separates the national spirit into separate political groups. Now, there are political groups within a given ethnic nationality, but what he was referring there to probably was the political group within the national spirit within the ethnic boundaries. And if there were more than one ethnic boundary in a state, he discussed that as multiple national spirits. He considered ethnicity as being the national spirit, as it were. All right, so another fundamental principle of Hegel, in addition to monotheism, was that there are successive phases of spirit which animate nations. Now we're going to get down to what the Bible has to say. We're going to relate that now, and where he gets his information, how he understands it, we're going to relate it to the Word of God. Turn with me, if you would, to the book of Joshua, chapter 1. Book of Joshua, chapter 1. And let's just read verses 1 through 6. Now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread, that have I given unto you, as I said unto Moses. From the wilderness of this Lebanon, even unto the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and unto the great sea toward the going down of the sun, shall be your coast. There shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life, as I was with Moses. So I will be with thee, I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Be strong and of good courage, for unto this people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land which I swear unto their fathers to give them. Now what he's reciting there is a young, lean, and mean nation, ready to grow, ready to go and conquer. That's the description, the first premise of this part of Hegelian philosophy. It's the young spirit. Now we need to keep that in mind when we talk about Hegel. Then, of course, his second part is that you have the successful nation, the powerful nation, like in the days of David. And there was no nation that would stand before you. They would all fall. So, now think what I'm saying here now with respect to the United States of America. Think in terms of that young, lean, mean nation that was described there in Joshua 1, verses 1 through 6, when we came ashore here in the United States of America. We were ready to do this. We were young. We were vibrant. We had a young national spirit. Then we got to the point where there wasn't a nation in the world that would stand up to us. We could whip them all. They ran from us. We didn't even have to have fights with nations. And they wouldn't fight with Uncle Sam. Then his third point was that a nation then becomes fat, becomes a lazy nation with no purpose or no worth. Now, what we need to do there is to turn to Jeremiah, the 50th chapter. Jeremiah 50. This wind slows you down a little bit, doesn't it? And let's read verses 11 through 13. Jeremiah 50, 11 through 13. Because you were glad, because ye rejoiced, O ye destroyers of mine heritage, because ye are grown fat as the heifers at grass, and bellow as bulls. Your mother shall be sore confounded, she that bare you shall be ashamed. Behold, the hindermost of the nations shall be a wilderness, a dry land, and a desert. Because of the wrath of the Lord it shall not be inhabited, but it shall be wholly desolate. Every one that goeth by Babylon shall be astonished and hiss at all her plagues. That's where we are today in the United States of America. So from Hegel's point of view, that a nation grows from a young, lean, mean nation, becomes competent, and then fat and sassy, the young heifer that kicked and the bulls that bellowed. The nation then begins to dwindle, and all of a sudden another young, lean, and mean nation or ethnic group comes and conquers. Now we in the United States of America are in the last portion. The young, lean, mean nations are taking us over. So Hegel was right in his philosophy. You go through the cycles. Now, another point that Hegel insisted upon was a moral, political organization in the development of the nation. Now, that doesn't sound strange to me. Our nation was a Christian nation. It was moral, and it was a political nation. Because the politics of the Christian nation, the United States of America in its youth, came about as the laws and the statutes and the judgments of God. So that was in the terms that he is using, a political organization in addition to being a moral organization. So he's not separating what he terms the universal spirit. He's not separating God from this operation of the young, lean, and mean nation taking over. Now, he liked to discuss Rome. He used the rise and the fall of the Roman Empire as his classical example of explaining his dialectic. Now, maybe I should even define the word dialectic. What does the word dialectic itself mean? Discriminating truth from error. The art of reasoning about matters of opinion. Now, we in Bible study classes do exactly that. It's the art of reasoning about matters of opinion. We will each have an opinion as to what the verses that we're talking about say, and we'll rise to the bait and we'll talk about them in the Bible study. So what we're doing in a Bible study is having dialectics. All right, so the word itself is not a naughty word. It's perfectly good English word, and we should understand it. All right, so Hegel spoke very often of the conflict between the patricians and the plebeians in Rome. Now go back to your history book, and you'll find that the patricians, of course, were those that had, and the plebeians were those that didn't have. And if you'll recall, in War Cycles, Peace Cycles, Richard Hoskins talks a lot about the fall of the Roman Empire. It was all associated around usury. And of course, our problems are also all associated around usury. So we broke a rule of God, and we're in the problem we're in because of it. But the plebeians didn't have any money, and most of them were farmers who had moved into the city to receive the dole. So here they were looking at the patricians who had the money, and they said, "You have and we don't." And so the conflict took place. Now we're getting to the point of Hegel's dialectic where he's talking about this conflict of the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. His point was, it is a natural progression of things, that as these nations rise and fall, you have the conflicts within that are built in, and they just come. Now that's Hegel's dialectic. That's the way he saw it. All right, now, the plebeians were compelled back in Rome to attach themselves to the richer, to the patricians. And then the patricians became the creditors to the plebeians. You read about it in Hegel in Hoskins' War Cycles, Peace Cycles. All right, then this struggle took place between the patricians and the plebeians, and the patricians destroyed themselves in making themselves dependent upon the plebeians. This is a cardinal principle of what he is saying, and it's biblical. It is also what you see going on about you now. In his book also, he talked about how we always made ourselves, the Celto-Saxon, the Nordic race, made itself dependent upon the other ethnic people of the world by bringing them in to be our servants. And when we did this, we became dependent upon them, and as we became dependent upon them, we then lost to them, and they became our master. Now you're seeing that very thing in the United States of America today. Now, Hegel then generalizes this principle when he declares that the spirit of the people carries within itself its own destruction. Think about our society. Think about our ethnic group. Think about our religious aspects of the way we live. And that personal spirit carried with us our own destruction as a group of people. Now, oddly enough, this principle was not new with Hegel. Plato, he pointed it out. And of course we hear bad things about Plato, and there are many, many bad things about Plato, being pantheistic and things like this. But he pointed out that society educates, I'm going to quote this exactly, educate those who turn against society itself, and therefore in providing them with an education, equip them with the means to destroy society. Now, did you get what I said there? Plato himself even said that we will take these people and bring them in, and we will educate them, and in many times educate them better than we educate our own children. We give them the education with which to destroy ourselves. Now, that's a principle that even Plato observed, and we're doing it. Down in Texas, we have a national law now down in Texas where it's federal law that you have to educate all of the illegal aliens coming from Mexico. And in the school right south of us, the whole school system, 95% of all the children are on a free lunch program, and over 50% of them are illegal aliens. And so you see, we are forcing ourselves down that same primrose path that Hegel and Plato before him discusses. Another example that comes to mind, how many of you have read Frank Bitten's Inside or Behind Communism? You've all read it. Do you notice in there how he talked about how the czars of Russia educated the Jews in Russia even over their own people? And because he was, being a good Christian man, he wanted to show the whole world that he wasn't anti-Semitic, and so he took these Jews in the Pale who had been kicked back out of there from Europe on time several times, and educated them to a much higher degree than he educated his own people, and it destroyed him. So it again is a concept of Plato. All right, now to me, I believe that Hegel was utilizing his theological training at the school of Tübingen as he developed this philosophy. And if you think about it, you can see this. Yes, sir.
How do you distinguish between the desire of the people and the dictates of their leadership, which is the case in our pursuing the policies you just described?
Yes, sir.
It's not the desire of the people to implement these policies.
Yes, sir. We're going to cover that in just a second, because it's one of Hegel's principles that we better follow, or we're going to do just exactly what you say, and we've done it. All right, now, Hegel believed that opposition, just the whole idea of contest, is universal in all reality. Now, there's nothing strange about that. There are technical laws that say this also. The second law of thermodynamics says that everything winds down, and there is competition or conflict with everything that is moving. The earth is slowly winding down. And so there's nothing strange about this. From a technical point of view and from a theological point of view, we have to have the technical and the theological go together. There's nothing obnoxious about that. We know that is a technical fact. All right, so he said that the opposition is universal in all reality. Opposition, according to Hegel, is essential to all that is creative or significant in human life. Interest is present only where there is opposition. That's what causes us not to become fat and sassy, and the bulls bellowed. We have no opposition. We have no contest within us. We don't have any more borders, no more frontiers to conquer. It is a human nature thing to want to have this competitive spirit. That's the reason why we have gone into sports, one of the reasons. We've gone into sports so thoroughly, because there is that competitive spirit within us that causes us to do this. He said that without opposition, the living, substantial soul itself may be said to have ceased its activity. So these are pretty strong words that he's talking about. And we have castigated Hegel for saying some of these things in years past. And I can see where a Judeo-Christian church would do that. But I can also see where an identity message would be a little bit slower to castigate the points he's making, because we see the history of Israel in a different light than these Judeo-Christian churches see the history of Israel. And so consequently, I think we can understand it a little better. Now, probably the centerpiece of his philosophy was the use of war to bring about changes. Now, here we're going to get into a lot of trouble in the denominational churches with Hegel. And it's one of the biggest reasons why he's disliked. He referred to the battle at Salamis, where the Greeks destroyed the Persian fleet, as a glorious battle day. He considered that battle, the one at Salamis, as to be a world historical victory. So he shows the importance of war in the bringing about of the development of a nation, and that includes Israel, because I believe this is one of the most warlike books we've ever read. So, see, God places war as a centerpiece in his plan, and so we must understand that. And everything, as Hegel said, that everything is basically good. Well, you know, we also say that everything is good for those who love God. So we don't have any contest in the identity movement with that statement. So, but you can see where other churches come from. All right, he referred also to the Second Punic War. That's where Rome fought with Carthage, and he says this, these are his words: "He lay the might of Carthage prostrate in the dust." Hegel claimed that war to be the noblest period of Rome. He laid Carthage prostrate in the dust. Okay, so you can see this battle that Rome, being a young, vibrant, lean, and mean nation, took on Carthage twice, and in the Second Punic War, that was when they poured the salt in the ground. It was at this time that Hegel says was the most important time in all of the history of Rome. So keep that in mind. And again, I don't believe God says it much differently in the history of Israel. So we want to keep that in mind. He also said that war helped establish the Protestant church. And then he gave the examples. Among others was the example of course, Martin Luther's wars. You know, Martin Luther had an army. He had a pretty good size army. And there were many wars fought by Martin Luther in Germany to bring the Protestant Reformation about once he got started. And so other wars, of course, were in England and France and so forth. It was all the Crusades as a part of his concept. All right, so we can readily summarize Hegel's philosophy as showing that he considered the individual spirit, the national or racial spirit, and the Spirit of God, which he termed the universal spirit, And then he says that there exists within his society a continual opposition or conflict. And that is the thesis, the antithesis, and the synthesis. All right, so how many of you read, or even read at, Spengler's Decline of the West? It's a hard book to read, and but there's a lot of good meat in there. And Francis Yockey describes in his book Imperium the same concept. The only thing there in the book Imperium, he calls it the will to power. Instead of this national spirit, he talks about within an ethnic group this will to power, being in a power position. And that again doesn't change anything that is said in here. There's nothing unusual about this. All right, so what we have today is the brown power, the black power, and they're rising. And they're young. They're vibrant. They may be old peoples, but you see the same people go through these cycles. And within the United States, within the world, you have the brown people in the Islamic Jihad, you have the black people in this new Africans concept in the United States. All of these things are young and vibrant to these people. And yet at the same time, in the streets and in the homes in the United States of America today, our people can't be interested in this. They don't even understand that we're fat and sassy and the heifer kicked. We're sucking on a six-pack of beer. I'm not talking about you people. We're watching the boob tube constantly, and we can't even become interested that we're on the decline of the greatness of the United States of America. And we have this young, vibrant situation taking place. All right, now, let's compare Hegel's dialectic to the Marxian philosophy of dialectical materialism. The difference is a very simple difference. Hegel showed the conflict to be within a nation or a racial group. He showed that it was spiritual and that there must be strong morals in the development of this. Marx taught that the conflict was universal, and the conflict was solely between those who owned the means of producing the essential livelihood and those who are employed to use those means. Marx thought that it was strictly within the entire world community, from the haves to the have-nots. And you see, so he already modified the Hegelian dialect considerably. Now, we call that the brotherhood of man. And he also made no mention of a spiritual battle, and the only contest was materialistic and economic. Now, what he did also was he married his concept with another man who was a renegade theologian by the name of Feuerbach, who just all of a sudden turned away from God and began to hate God and said that everything was just nothing but material in motion. That was all the whole world was. And so Marx brought from Feuerbach the concept of material in motion, and he married that with his modified concept of Hegel, and he called it dialectical materialism. Most people consider Marx to be an atheist. He wasn't. He wasn't an atheist. He knew there was a God. The only thing about it was that he hated God. And so did his brother Engel. I say his blood brother. Marx wrote a poem. It goes like this, and I think that you'll see where he hated God. So a God has snatched from me my all in the curse and rack of destiny. All his words are gone beyond recall. Nothing but revenge is left for me. That was Marx. That doesn't sound like he didn't believe in God. That sounds like he hated God. Now, his brother in crime, Engels, said this: we have nothing to do anymore with indifference or coldness toward the Lord. No, it is an open, declared enmity. So both of those men believed in God, but both of them hated God. And so what you can see is that they hated him, and that their concept was the consignment of the entire human race to damnation. And that's where they're going. All right, so how much more time do I have? How many? Oh my goodness, okay. Let me just close it by showing how the Hegelian dialect, or the dialectical materialism, is actually used with us. You know, what they do is they put us into a catch-22 position every time, or one of these things where it's heads I win, tails you lose. And they do it every time to us. It goes something like this. We have 10 propositions on a ballot, and we're against all 10 of them. Every one of them are socialist. Every one of them are to the left. Every one of them are anti-God. Every one of them are against Christianity. The vote comes. We win 9, and we lose 1. We go home with our thumbs in our armpits and say, we just beat the commies cold. We didn't. We lost. That's the way they work. Because next year they come back and they'll put 10 more on. They'll put the 9 that you had beaten them on last time. And ERA is a good example of that. It's on every year. Isn't it automatically how isn't it funny how automatically on January 1 every year it comes back up for a vote again? And if we had one on death to all homosexuals, you'd say at one time, that's the end of it. I mean, that's it, period. Well, that's the way it works. That's the way dialectical materialism works. All right? The Genocide Treaty is a perfect example. 37 years and on and on and on, and finally, it's over with now. Can we contest it? No, it's done. See, it's over with. So that's the dialectics of how they do it. All right, now, back through history, you will find that what we have done in every time that a nation has fallen, where Uncle Sammy has been a part of it, you'll find that what they did, they would send one of our hatchet men in to offer them a coalition. General Marshall, Catlett Marshall, when he went into China, General Chiang Kai-shek, of course, was on the right, and Mao Zedong was on the left, and Catlett Marshall went in and said, I'm going to offer you something you can't refuse. I'm going to offer you a coalition government where you have a single government, and Mao Zedong's representatives are on it, and your people are on it, and of course in 6 months later your people will be off and Mao Zedong will be in full. Well, the concept, though, was what he says, I'll offer you a coalition. Chiang Kai-shek said no, and so what did he do? He pulled the rug out from under him and said that you no more arms, you're dead. And so, of course, Mao Zedong won. All right, so down through the years, the last example of this was that in the Philippines. Aquino was the result of a coalition that was offered to Marcos, and he refused. Somoza in Nicaragua, our brother Henry went down there and offered them the coalition. Now, this is the way they do it. They offer the controlled conflict. And when they say, we don't want a controlled conflict, they just cut the ropes off, the rug off from under you, and you lose anyway. All right, so the last thing, and I'll close it off, the example that is so good is the Freedom Council issued a presidential poll here just recently, and I got a copy of it, and they asked me to send back, check which one of these I thought would make the best president, and which one, if now was the election, would you vote for president? And let me give you the names. Howard Baker, George Bush, Mario Cuomo, Bob Dole, Gary Hart, Lee Iacocca, Jesse Jackson, Jack Kemp, Teddy Kennedy, Gene Kirkpatrick, and Pat Robertson. Now you see how it goes?
You need to read his book.
All right. All right. I'm about out of time. Does anyone have a real quick question? Just a comment, sir. Yes, Jim.
Bringing up the Freedom Council, that's, of course, the organization Pat Robertson founded a couple years ago. But I don't know if I sent you this clipping yet from the Palm Beach Jewish World, where the paid coordinator for the whole state of Florida, his name is Pinsky, Pinsky, and he's a born-again Jew. And, of course, the Freedom Council is almost all the evangelical Christians getting involved. And You've got the Antichrist running it for the whole.
Sure. Now you see, now there's controlled conflict, Marxian controlled conflict par excellence. They got both sides, you see.
Another thing on the Freedom Council, they were the major force in Missouri in getting the last state to call for a constitutional convention, the 32nd state in Missouri. That was their major effort that they did.
So what you can see is that in some aspects, Hegel has taken a bum rap because Marx and Engels really flipped it over and they have given Hegel the credit for the dialectical materialism, and it wasn't Hegel's teaching. He didn't teach communism. He taught a powerful state, but he said it was to be a moral political organization. Now, what do we want when we want a nation, one nation under God? We want a moral political organization that is powerful in the name of the holy word of God, the law, statutes, and judgments. All right, now that is exactly what Hegel was saying. So, you see, we have to reconsider, reevaluate. Just because we see it in print someplace doesn't make it true. We have to reassess these things and come back then and say, what does God say about it, and how does what Hegel had to say compare with the Word of God?